Åsa Gustafsson is a Deputy Director at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and perhaps more important today, a researcher in international law at Åbo Akademi University. And I would like to turn the floor over to Mrs. Gustafsson, who will discuss demilitarization and neutralization in the context of the European security. Welcome.
Honorable President, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to have been invited to this occasion. As was mentioned, the theme for my presentation is the Åland Islands status as demilitarized and neutralized in the context of the EU Common Security and Defense Policy. The acronym used often in the EU is, of course, the CSDP. It was originally launched in 1999. I will give a brief overview of security and defense developments in the EU and thereafter point to some specific aspects and implications for the Åland status as demilitarized and neutralized. The idea of a security or defense alliance in Europe is as old as the Union itself, but attempts made have failed. However, new efforts are being made, emanating from a heightened sense of insecurity in the EU. Views differ on what exactly this will lead to, and it's an ongoing work. When looking closer at security developments, it is interesting to note how the formulations in two major EU strategic documents, security documents, have changed. In the first European security strategy of 2003, it was, for instance, stated that Europe has never been so prosperous, so secure, nor so free. But in the EU Global Strategy of 2016, there were other formulations or of another character, such as we live in times of existential crisis, our union is under threat. In 2016, the then President of the EU Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, proposed a defense union by 2025. And the EU Commission also launched a defense action plan that same year. Also, recently, around a month ago, the current Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, called for a European Defense Union. Since 2016, there are a number of EU initiatives that have been rolled out that can be seen as part of this. The European Defence Fund, which is meant to increase cooperation on defence projects, the so-called Strategic Compass, that, based on a common threat analysis, aims to define the EU's level as a security provider. And there is a military mobility project, which is a flagship project within the EU-NATO cooperation, aiming at facilitating the movement of military troops. And there's also the permanent structured cooperation, the acronym is PESCO, aimed at fostering a sense of military solidarity across the Union. This can be framed, this cooperation, as an economically rational cooperation in defense procurement, but it can also be seen as a step towards a European security community. Having listed these initiatives that are referred to as a part of EU security and defense policy, I think it's important to remind and to refer to EU-NATO complementarity. This is stressed commonly by parties involved on both EU and NATO sides in this ongoing work. Turning to Åland. Åland is not mentioned in EU CSDP acts of any kinds. The demilitarization of Åland is a sui generis project that's might be why it's difficult to locate in a European security context. However, importantly, as is well known, I think there is a reference in primary EU law to the status of Åland Islands. It was included in Protocol 2, which was attached to Finland's accession treaty in 1994. where the status is recognized. And also after the Finnish EU accession, the demilitarized status has been confirmed, for instance, in the Lisbon Treaty that came into force 2009. And there is a reference there to that the protocol is still in force. Can also be mentioned that Finland gave a unilateral declaration at this EU meeting of permanent representatives, COREPER it's called, stating that demilitarized and neutralized status of Åland remains in force also after the 2009 entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty. This was in 2010 that this declaration was made. I will turn now to two specific clauses in the security defense field that are of particular importance, I think, for Åland. There are two clauses. They were included already with the Lisbon Treaty in 2009. It's the mutual assistance clause, also called mutual defense clause by some, in Article 42.7 in the Treaty on European Union. The clause provides that if an EU state is the victim of armed aggression on its territory, the other EU states have an obligation to aid and assist by all the means in their power in accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. Article 51 in the Charter is the one that is an exception to the prohibition on the use of force between states. It states that individual and collective self-defense is allowed as a response to an armed attack. I could also mention here in this context that this clause contains a reference to a non-aligned state, in the sense that it says that this clause is without prejudice to the specific character of the security and defense policy of certain EU member states. As you know and are aware of, there are a few non-aligned states in the EU of somewhat varying character, but Sweden and Finland are in that group. France invoked Article 42.7 after the 2015 terrorist attacks, the only time it has been invoked. Belgium did not invoke it after the attacks in 2016. The article mainly entails an intergovernmental process between states. It does not set out any formal procedure, and there is, for instance, no council decision needed to start off the process. However, returning to the NATO-EU relationship, I think it's important to point to that part of the article, that the duty to assist is subsumed to the relationship with NATO. For instance, to spell it out, it's considered that the EU's mutual assistance clause cannot be invoked if NATO's or the North Atlantic Treaty's well-known Article 5 has already been invoked. The second clause is Article 222 of the treaty, in the Treaty on the functioning of the EU. It's also usually referred to as the Solidarity Clause. It provides that EU states are obliged to act jointly, where an EU state is the victim of a terrorist attack or a disaster, natural or man-made. This article has not been invoked so far. So it's interesting to try to turn to a concrete scenario. If an EU member state, for a valid reason, requests access to the demilitarized territory of Åland under the EU Mutual Assistance Clause or the Solidarity Clause, Finland would have to balance the requirements of the demilitarization regime. I'm now assuming that we are in peacetime, against the assistance to be given under EU law, and also the requirements of the UN Charter. Here it's appropriate to refer then to the 1921 Convention that we are honoring today. It is very detailed, as was already pointed out here, and contains provision as what is permitted in peacetime, and as was already referred to, exceptions should be, in that case, interpreted restrictively. That concludes my overview of what is most relevant regarding the CSDP and Åland. But finally, a few general remarks of a general character. The demilitarization was intended to prevent war and decrease tension in the Baltic Sea and Northern Europe. Regional cooperation may have that same purpose, and regional cooperation can serve to safeguard the demilitarized status of Åland if pursued with such an intention, and this will contribute to continued stability. Thank you for your attention.